This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Welcome to a special best of edition of Real Talk, where we're going to take a look back at some of the most important interviews I think that we've done on this show. We're going to talk to the planet protectors. We're going to learn more about microbes and microplastics and our plastic problem, quite frankly. We're going to take a look at the looming wildfire season and what the future of fire looks like across Canada and around the world. And we'll revisit our World Water Day roundtable. We don't talk nearly enough about water. We're going to bring you the moments that made the biggest impression on us and what we think sends the most important message to our fellow citizens. This episode of Real Talk is happening with the support of Relo, Alberta's top real estate school. And if you check them out online right now at relo.ca, you can learn more about why better real estate training starts at Relo. More and more Albertans are choosing Relo because of its flexibility. All the learning is online. Plus, they've got expert instructors that are invested in your success. They're going to help you prepare for your exam. They're going to help you get licensed to practice real estate in the province. And then once you've launched your career, the relationship continues. They've got that support to make sure that you're doing the absolute best you can. Unlimited earning potential. You're your own boss. We probably don't have to tell you all the reasons why more and more people are looking to a career in real estate. Do yourself a favor at relo.ca. Use that promo code Ryan100. They're going to knock $100 off both the residential and commercial real estate bundles just because you heard about it on this show. That's Ryan100, the promo code you want to use at relo.ca. Well, you probably can't look anywhere in any direction without seeing plastic. In some way, shape, or form, it is a part of our everyday life, whether we realize it or not. But the evidence is growing. Look no further than that Texas-sized floating plastic island in the ocean. It twists my gut just to think about it. We do have a plastic problem. The good news is there are experts around the world, including right here in our own backyard at Athabasca University, that are finding ways to tackle it, finding ways to address it in meaningful fashion. Dr. Srijak Bhatnagar joined us on our Earth Day edition of Real Talk, and quite frankly, infused a little hope into the conversation.
We all use plastic. If you look around, we are surrounded by plastic in so many different ways and so many different forms. And we use it because they're easy, they're durable, and that's what makes it a bit challenging of how much plastic we are using and producing. So an estimate is, I think we are roughly producing over 800 million tons of plastic every year, and only 10% or even less of that is recycled. About another 20% gets burned up for cleanup or energy generation. So we're still left with 70% of the plastic that we produce. And the interesting thing is that most of the plastics produced within this year or within a year gets discarded of production. So that's crazy amount of plastic that we just use within a year, and it lingers around for hundreds of years. And so what does that mean for us in the environment? What does it mean for our animals and the waters on the planet?
Yeah, so what does it mean? When we're talking about plastics, first of all, do we need to delineate between plastic and single-use plastics? The reason why I ask, when we look at like plastic bag bans, for example, this is something that becomes a very real part of someone's life where they're getting charged 15 cents at the store or the grocery store doesn't offer bags anymore. So we're hearing a lot more about single-use plastics. Do we need to have a more specific conversation in your mind?
As far as single-use plastic is concerned, I think the definition is very narrow right now. We are a lot focusing on plastic bag or grocery bag itself, but there can be so many different single-use plastics, especially packaging. Once you open it, you are not going to keep the plastic that your food came in, that your products came in. You're going to discard it. That's also single-use plastic. So as part of reducing the amount of plastic we're using, because the less plastic we use, then the less likely we will create pollution problems. Single-use plastic is definitely an important issue to address because if there are alternate ways of not using that plastic, so for example, there's been a lot of conversation about single-use plastic bans, especially in Calgary, where I've been, where co-op gives out compostable plastics, which is easy to get rid of. So what does the single-use plastic here means? Because we need to be able to look at not just the plastic is single-use, but how easily or how much we can actually clean up the plastic.
Okay, so let's get to that because this is what you're looking at, right? This is the problem that you and your team are endeavoring to solve.
Yeah, so once a plastic gets into the environment, whether it's a bottle or a plastic bag, it tends to break down. It tends to fall apart. Anyone and everyone has seen just a piece of plastic bag floating around in the air because it is like badly disintegrated, badly fallen apart because of sun, air, water, all the forces of nature. It falls apart. And when it falls apart, it becomes tiny, tiny pieces of plastic called microplastic, and they are everywhere. And that's what my lab and my research group is studying, because these microplastics or these very tiny plastic pieces have been seen and found everywhere from Mount Everest to the deepest depth of the ocean, where we have been able to reach. To even in our bodies, in our lung, in our blood, in our placenta. So these tiny plastic pieces, the microplastics, are everywhere. And that should raise an alarm, and it justifiably raises an alarm. And we are trying to see that what are these microplastics doing? Just because they're everywhere doesn't necessarily mean they're harmful. We know that for water, it's everywhere and it's not harmful in the right context. And the same way, we need to figure out that now that plastic and microplastic is everywhere, what is it doing? And I'm specifically studying microplastic from the angle of bacteria or these invisible microbial life forms that are on it to see two aspects of it. One, we know that bacteria can settle on the plastic and they make a home of the plastic, including these tiny microplastic pieces. And we want to know that are these bacteria disease causing? So are these tiny pieces of microplastic have basically become buses to shuttle around disease causing bacteria that then can enter our bodies or bodies of animals and fishes? Or the second angle that I'm more interested in and I'm looking at is the bacteria that are living on these tiny pieces of plastic, are they eating the plastic itself? Because if they're eating the plastic, that is a fantastic news for us because then they are our allies. Then we can work with them, we can use them, we can harness them to actually clean up our own plastic pollution.
Wow. I just want to go, but let me just sort of commend you on your storytelling for you to say to us that we're discovering microplastics on Mount Everest and in placentas, in utero. I mean, that just sort of reiterates that they are literally everywhere, right? Like the minute you tell us that they're up on the International Space Station, then all of a sudden we realize that it's inescapable. And then part of me goes, oh, but you're going, well, it's not necessarily, I mean, and you're probably going to want to qualify what you're saying here. But the way that it lands with me is you're not denying that we have a plastic problem, but you're saying like it's not inherently harmful. Like in other words, we don't need to hit the panic button quite yet. Not to deny that we have a plastic issue, but I find some balance in your assessment here.
Yes, there is a balance in my assessment. Part of the reason is because we know so little about these microplastic pieces. It's only in the last 10 years that we have started looking for these microplastic pieces everywhere, and we have been finding it. Now that we know that they are everywhere, the next step, and that's where we come in, is to start looking at what are they doing? Because unless we know what are they doing, then how do we address the harmful effect they could be causing and bringing? Um, I mean, personally, finding microplastic or anything, I would say, uh, that we use in the placenta, which is, so far removed from the environment, is terrifying. But they are getting there. If they are getting there, what are they doing? Because that's an important question to answer. Because unless we know that, we cannot address the microplastics that are in the environment. Yes, we can come up with technologies and ways to reduce the plastic we use, to keep it from getting out into the waters, into the ocean, but it's already out there and the plastic is around. And as I said, it is going to be around for hundreds of years. So then, even if we stop using plastic right now,
Yeah.
there's still going to be microplastic around for hundreds of years to
And
come.
we're not going to
So
stop
what are
using
we
it right
doing?
now, right? Again, we're not going to stop using it right now. But you're 100%
exactly.
correct. We've got the issue that exists at this moment, and we've got the issue that exists moving forward. It seems to me to be like smoking cessation programs with governments. You've got the people that have been smoking for 50 years already that are going to have their own issues, that already have the issues. And then you've got the generation to come where you go, what do we want smoking rates to look like 50 years from now, right? So you got to address both of them. Is it possible for you, and I'm sure you can you dumb down ultimately like the end game? And I know right now you're fact gathering and you're researching with your colleagues at Athabasca University, but ultimately, how could this be addressed? Like, is this like drones hovering over these plastic islands and dropping these things that attach to the microbials that eat the plastic? Like, how does it go? Can we turn it into fish food or something?
So there are two ways that I have so far thought of that we can at least reduce a large amount of microplastic that's getting into our water. The first one is it's leaching from our clothes. A lot of our clothes, especially the quick dye clothes, are made from plastics. When we wash them, a little bit of fiber leaches out every time we wash them. It comes out into the water and then it goes down the drain. So all of those drains are leading into wastewater treatment plants. So that's one place where we could use the microbes to treat the plastic pollution. The second one, and the second biggest source of microplastics, is tires. Every time we drive around, tire debris comes out. Is a type of plastic. And so all of that goes down a stormwater drain. So in a city like Calgary, the stormwater drain is also sort of treated minimally, that there are settling ponds around to get rid of particulates from the water before it's getting discharged into the river. And I think that's another place that we can leverage plastic degrading bacteria to start cleaning out our plastic waste. Because remember, a lot of plastic exists in the ocean, but not all of it. We took it out to the ocean in the form of fish nets and, water bottles falling off of the boats and ships. It is coming from inland. It is going through our waters. It is going through our rivers. And if we can keep it from getting into the river, or if we could even reduce it from getting into the river, I think that's a huge victory.
Do you have an opinion on the effect? I mean, this may be sort of getting out of your wheelhouse. I don't know, but part of this in addressing this issue would obviously be to reduce our use of plastics, in particular single-use plastics. Do you have an opinion on programs that are effective or not? Do you have an opinion on the efficiencies of our recycling programs across the country? Do you have a jurisdiction you've seen that's doing it particularly well?
I can comment to that as a consumer who
Yeah.
is also a plastic researcher from a microbiology perspective. But as a consumer, a lot of onus is put on us to reduce our plastic use and to be a good citizen and sort out our plastic and recycle it. Recycling facilities are not uniformly present across different communities. Larger cities tend to have better recycling facilities than smaller communities. What does that mean in terms of plastic recycling, right? There we see a number on the back of the plastic and we see a recycling logo. The logo exists doesn't necessarily mean it's recyclable. That's an important part. A certain jurisdiction, certain municipalities only process number 1 and number 2, which are like polyethylene versions, because they're easy to recycle. And So there's an aspect to like, there's only so much we can recycle, and only plastic is like a large different types of chemicals, right? Because the plastic that's in my clamshell of tomatoes is not the same as the plastic that's making this computer monitor. So not all plastic is recyclable, right? Um, so as a consumer, I think there also has to be an onus. There also has to be, we believe in choices in Canada and in North America, that as a consumer, I should have a choice. So I should have a choice to buy my cucumber and buy my potatoes not packed individually in plastic bags or wrapped up in plastic. Do I have that choice? So there has to be some top-down approach, some inducement, I believe, from the government to actually steer the packaging industry towards non-plastic and more or compostable and earth-friendly packaging materials.
So the whole idea around microbes, I did like a tiny bit of reading before I talked to you, just so I didn't sound like a complete idiot. But I wanted to bring some sort of like idiot element to this so you could kind of dumb this down to us, and so I can ask these innocent questions, these sort of junior high level questions. But microbes, I was interested to learn and to read. I guess I've kind of underestimated microbes. If somebody would have put me on the spot and said, tell me about them, I probably wouldn't have been able to do much, except to say, I know you can't see them with the naked eye. I know that much, I think. But we're talking penicillin, like bread, beer. This is like microbes are sort of already proving their potential, their capabilities in a way that's obviously got to give you reason for optimism that this could be a pretty significant discovery or a pretty significant technique.
Yes, I can also give more examples that are now being used by an average person. Probiotics, those are all microbes in a pill. And they are helping our digestive system. They're helping our body in terms of getting us nutrients or getting nutrients out of the food or just generally making us healthy. There's a huge aspect of human microbiome, or the microbes that are in and on us, and how they are helping us whether in so many different ways. And so probiotic is another example. Another example I can give you of microbes in action is before studying plastic, I used to study microbes for oil cleanup. So there are, yes, they're invisible. And part of the reason that's why they go underestimated, because they're doing so many different things. Microbes are the real lungs of the planet. Microbes in the ocean fix more carbon dioxide, produce more oxygen than the Amazon rainforest. Microbes are able to do so many different things. The reason we can grow peas and beans without adding any nitrogen fertilizer is because of microbes. These plants tend to bring and shelter the microbes that can take the nitrogen out of the air, so we don't have to supply it as part of our fertilizer. And as I was mentioning, that means these millions of different species of microbes have so many large number of things that they could do that tend to go unnoticed largely. And so I was looking at how can and what microbes can do to oil spills. How can we clean up the oil spills? And from that, the next step was to study plastics, because a lot of plastics are made from petroleum, and that's why they're called petrochemicals.
Buddy, you're figuring out how to clean up oil spills, how to deal with the plastic problem. We got to send you a Superman t-shirt so you can wear it.
Oh, I would say microbes are the one who should get that Superman suit.
Well, sure, but the human brain power behind it, doing this research at AU is pretty remarkable. We brought you here to talk about plastics, but let me pick your brain on oil spills. I mean, it's just such a gut punch. I mean, we know the world, needs oil. We'll see what the world's relationship with oil looks like in 50 years. But like right now, we're still using oil, which means we're transporting it. There's debates across this country and others around pipeline expansion, around using rail, tankers, offshore drilling. We've seen what can happen, disasters there, the BP spill. I mean, just remember that, the underwater did you watch that underwater camera at all? You know the exact one I'm talking about. It was just showing gushing. I would watch it, and then I was just appalled. I had to turn it off. So where are we I mean, I know you're not going to say it's not a problem. It's obviously a huge issue. But like when Lake Wabamun happens and a train derails and dumps into the lake or an area is polluted, how far ahead are we than like 10 years ago in understanding how we can, can you ever get the environment back to where it was?
So that was the biggest question that came out of the Deepwater Horizon. Everyone saw oil gushing out, and scientists rushed to study it. Scientists rushed to clean it up, and microbiologists were also there. And when the Deepwater Horizon spill was cleaned up, we had no idea if the cleanup actually was complete. Did the environment go back to what it was pre-oil spill? And that was a huge part of my work as part of oil spill remediation. And we were specifically focusing in Arctic Ocean because with thawing sea ice, there's going to be a lot more ship traffic happening through there, which means there will be oil spills. And so we wanted to see what happens in a remote area where we can't respond so quickly to oil spill. And the first step we did was not only look at are there microbes that could eat oil spill or that could clean up oil spill, but we also decided to look across entire Arctic Ocean of Canada to start establishing what we call microbial baseline. So what that allows is we know if before any oil spill happened, what the environment looked like in the context of microbes. And so if and when an oil spill happens and gets cleaned up, we have something to compare it back to. So we can say, yes, the oil spill cleanup is finished and we have been able to bring the environment back.
How far away you might get this question at cocktail parties all the time, but like, how far away are we from solving the plastic problem? Like when I heard that there's this plastic island floating the size of the state of Texas in the ocean, you sit there and you go, like, it just feels like we're all going to have to get on a rocket ship to go live on Mars. It feels like we've just like destroyed this planet. Now I know, and someone once said this to me and it stopped me in my tracks. They said, planet Earth will be fine. Planet Earth will always be fine. Humans on planet Earth may not be fine, right? The planet's always going to be fine. We may not be fine. Can we solve our own problems? And if so, what's the time frame look like? Not to put you on the spot.
I would say that seeing how we are trying to solve our climate change problem, I would say a couple of decades. It needs to be concerted effort. In Canada, we can try to do everything we want, but we share the waters with entire world, right? We share our oceans. When I say waters, I mean oceans with the entire world. So if the plastic is being produced elsewhere, then it would move, it could move to our oceans, even though we may not produce. And again, we talked about we have to use plastics. For example, you can imagine what will happen if doctors and nurses didn't have PPE during COVID? That was made from plastic, right? So, and if we do go to Mars, if we do decide to evacuate the planet, I am fairly certain we'll take some plastic with us just because it's so versatile and durable.
Of course we will. And how will we power our rockets?
Right.
Like these are all,
or, inside the rocket, there will be components made of plastic. All the cables, all the wiring is going to be coated in plastic, right?
Is this, I don't know if this is outside. First of all, I can't tell you how much, I don't always say this. I'm really enjoying talking to you, and our audience is really enjoying this as well. Thank you. You do like a masterful job of taking high level stuff and kind of, what do I say? Making it more accessible. I'm trying not to say dumb it down, but I really appreciate that. We're talking about carbon capture a little bit on the show. And we're talking about the uses of that carbon. I don't want to get too out of my depth here, but what role do you see for carbon fiber or other carbon-derived, what's the word I'm looking for? Products, other applications of carbon in replacing plastics. I see, for example, like in custom vehicles, in body work, I'm seeing a lot of carbon fiber in like athletic gear, like hockey sticks would be an example. But like there's a million applications, obviously. Can you see byproducts from our oil and gas and energy industries working to lessen our reliance on plastic?
I would need a moment to think about
Yeah, it feels
that
like I'm
because,
asking you kind of a loaded question.
yeah, it is a bit of loaded question, but uh, I should point out that a lot of plastic does come from our oil and gas, especially gas, like ethylene is a gas that becomes polyethylene. Um, in terms of carbon fiber, it comes down to is how we modify it so that it can break down naturally, so that natural forces, which in this case are microbes, can it's a lot more accessible to it. It's a lot more palatable to the microbes, so they can actually eat it up. Because if it's just ethylene, that is the base of plastic or polyethylene, I should not say plastic, but polyethylene or plastic bag, that's very readily eatable by microbes. But the fact that we string them along and make them into long chains, that makes it a lot less accessible, a lot less palatable to the microbes. So instead of being able to eat it from wherever, they have different ways of trying to slowly eat it. And so in terms of carbon fiber and using it, it will come down to is before we unleash it as more earth-friendly substitute for plastic, I think we should look at can it be eaten up by microbes? Because what we want is it should be durable, but as I mentioned, most of the plastic is discarded within a year, and we want something durable enough for, say, 5, 10 years, whatever the application may be.
Yeah.
And after that, it should just get eaten up.
Yeah, I saw an interesting. I'm not trying to pick on. There's a big pizza chain across the country. They've got restaurants across the country, and they have a new ad campaign out, and it's for the Stanley Cup playoffs. I don't know if you've seen it, but they're pitching an idea. Johnny, have you seen this? You know the big pizza chain I'm talking about?
No.
Started by that former RCMP officer. You know
No.
the one I'm talking about, BP's. And they've got this new ad out, and it's a terrible idea, as a matter of fact, because they're suggesting that because it's been like 30 years since a Canadian team.
Oh, I have seen
Don't worry,
this.
Dr. Batnagar. I'll bring this back. Don't worry. I'll bring it back. But they're suggesting that
encouraging we all cheer for
together.
whatever Canadian
we
team
all
makes
cheer
it
for
the
all
farthest.
that's not.
Why not?
Well, number one, go Bruins. I can't wait to see the Leafs lose.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I'd love to, but I get the idea. But here's the premise of the commercial, Doc, is they're talking about the heartache that hockey fans have experienced in Canada over the years. And so, like, when the Canucks lost to the Rangers in 94, and how do they show that? They show that by somebody, like, smashing their TV. And then they show, like, in 2017, when the Oilers lost, the Connor McDavid led Oilers in the first year in Rogers Place. And then they lost that heartbreaker. I think it was to Nashville. They wanted to go to the Stanley. It didn't work out. and then they show somebody driving and backing over their flat panel TV and crushing the TV. And then they show somebody throwing their radio out of the window and it smashes on the ground. And I mean, I guess it's an effective ad because here we are talking about it for free. But the first time I saw it, before I even knew what the ad was for, number one, I thought about, I'm going to be talking to you. And number two, I thought about, this is our relationship with appliances now. This is our relationship with anything that doesn't work. It's our relation when something, my wife and I'm not proud of it, but we did a cost benefit analysis. We just replaced a 4-year-old dishwasher because it cost us less to put a new one in than to bring a plumber or a repair technician in to fix it. So where does that where does that 4-year-old dishwasher go? To the dump. And I hope that some of it's recycled. I don't know. But you get the idea. Like our entire relationship with not just plastic, but with everything now is like, if it doesn't work, it's gone. And I've got a buddy who has a beer fridge in his garage. It is the coolest. I'm sure he's had to pay to maintain it a little bit. It's from the 1950s, this fridge. It's probably an absolute hog on its power usage, but it's still working. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. I mean, as consumers here, a bit of the onus, I mean, it's great and it's excellent that we have this technology. There's got to be some government programs in place. There's got to be something to influence, I think, consumer behavior to a certain degree. But a lot of this falls back on us, too.
That is very true. And as you mentioned, that you're just replacing the dishwasher 4-year-old only because it's cheaper to buy. There are two aspects to it that I can think of. One is that where our production is at with mass production and assembly lines, we make things a lot cheaper. And that's where I was saying that there has to be some top-down approach from the government to put the onus or share the onus of recycling with the manufacturer itself, and not put it 100% on the user, on the customer, because cost is an important aspect of it. But again, it is designed to be less repairable too, because, that drives the economy, and that drives the engine, that drives the GDP growth, is that we can sell more things. So there is a huge movement coming out of mostly electronics for right to repair, because a lot of us were around that we had computer towers that we could just swap parts out and upgrade it on a yearly or whatever basis we want. And now I have a laptop that if something breaks, it's just easier and cheaper for me to just go buy a new one and throw this out.
100%. Yeah. And then we got a good point from Larry, and Larry's right. I mean, there's been a lot of reporting on this. I'll reference CP24's reporting. But Larry says, Canada promised to stop exporting unwanted plastic waste, but it's definitely still happening. He says mountains of plastic, sometimes as tall as single-story buildings, are rotting in the streets in Myanmar. And Larry's not wrong. So, it's like, for us, though, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? Like,
Yep.
if it's not like piling up in our back property, or if it's not piling up in our garage, we kind of don't necessarily think of end stage, or the fact that this water bottle that we just drank on the side of the soccer field is going to end up floating near the Philippines, right? But that's where our heads need to be. Before we thank you for your time, and I feel like you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that is an important part of recycling is when we calculate that something is recycled, doesn't mean that we just send it to a recycler and then we just believe that check mark and like this amount of plastic is recycled, not knowing how or if it's even recycled, right? So
I had somebody that I promised to preserve their anonymity tell me that within the city of Edmonton tell me that they said people would be so disheartened and outraged if they saw how much of their quote unquote recycling actually winds up in the dump. And there's the obvious stuff, like people that I think mean well or maybe haven't read up enough, and so they're throwing like their pizza boxes in there. Those can't be recycled. But even the stuff that I think people think is being recycled, she told me the majority of it is not.
Yeah, it's called wish cycling, and I used to be guilty of wish cycling because I thought, oh, there's a recycle logo with a number and it's recyclable, until I found out it's not. For many reasons, for what the kind of plastic it is, but also think of like takeout containers that are black. The way the plastic is recycling works is the plastic needs to be sorted on different types of plastic, and we all throw all our plastic into one bin. So there is a sorting center somewhere which has a black conveyor belt. And if there is a black piece of plastic on it, the optical sensor may not be able to pick. So a lot of that plastic is going to end up not getting recycled. Again, I know for a fact, I'm not going to say where, but or who, but a lot of our recycling does get contaminated as well for non-recyclable plastic, trash that ends up in the recycling stream, and then it gets diverted directly to landfill because it costs too much to be able to sort it than to actually recycle it. And that's where I think consumers can come in to be aware of what your municipality is able to recycle, and only throw that. And when you do that, you will realize how much plastic that we get and buy and or is, for the lack of a better term, get shoved on us, cannot be recycled.
Yeah.
And it's sorting is the reason why a lot of plastic gets sent offshore, because the human cost, the labor cost is a lot lower where someone can manually go and sort it apart. So so there is an aspect to that where I think it's a shared responsibility.
I want to thank you for your time. We've kept you way past what we've asked for, and so I appreciate that. I'd like to wrap with Dwayne's question, because it's a good one. We brought you on here to talk about microbes and plastic. We've talked about oil spill cleanups. We've talked about consumer behavior, environmental responsibility, a little bit of political policy. So I appreciate that. But Dwayne's curious to know, how could microbes factor in, or what approach might we take to other pollutants in our watersheds, in our rivers, streams, and oceans. Do the implications of microbes extend beyond oil spill cleanups and plastic cleanups? Like, I guess I don't want to. I guess I'm saying is that could they be a fix-all solution?
So just like plastics, microbes is a huge group of different things.
Right.
And
Okay.
so certain microbes will be helpful for certain things or certain pollutants and may not be helpful to certain pollutants. So another example I could give you here that I'm studying with research, working with the Big Stone Cree Nation in northern Alberta, is looking at herbicide spraying in the forest. Mostly because how the forestry industry works is there's a lot of herbicide application that happen, which is to say they go and spray very potent Roundup so that, you could regrow forest. But what the regrowing forest means is you kill the weeds. Many of those weeds are actually traditional indigenous medicine. So if they survive, or in this case, if the Roundup, or I shouldn't say Roundup because it's a trademark, but if the herbicide survives in the soil, can it move up into the plant and then end up in humans? And what does that mean? So I'm approaching it from a microbial angle to study, to see if the microbes can actually break down the herbicide and if the presence of those microbes could be used as a marker or as a sign that there is Roundup in the soil. So there's another example for you.
I'm picturing the Princess Leia hologram right now. Save us, Three Jack. You're our only hope. Save us.
Again, it's the microbes. It's not me.
I love conversations with smart people like Dr. Batnagar. And how about that humility as well? It's kind of a hallmark of a true genius, isn't it? Always looking for places to deflect or at least share the credit and share the praise. We sure appreciate him. Again, that was our April 22nd, 2024 episode of Real Talk. If you want to see the full episode, you can find it in our podcast and YouTube archives. That interview was presented by our friends at Athabasca University. It's Canada's open university. And no matter what your goals are, no matter what your job aspirations are, no matter your reason for pursuing that post-secondary journey, there's a fit for you at Athabasca U. It's all online, so it's delivered without barrier, right? Your only commute is to your device. The online experience is boosted by those expert instructors that, of course, are there for you just like they would be at your classic brick and mortar university. But AU has several factors that make it unique. You can check out Athabasca University online at athabascau.ca. Learn what it means to pursue your education your way. Learn about credit transfers and credit for experience for those mature students out there. Learn about Indigenous studies and support. And, of course, accreditation. You're in control. It's your education your way at Athabasca University. You can get started today at athabascau.ca. We're super excited for our friends at Canada's longest-running documentary film festival. That's Northwest Fest. It kicks off May 9th, runs through to the 15th, and that includes, of course, the Alberta premiere of Common Ground. Everybody's been looking forward to that. That's with Laura Dern, Jason Momoa, and Rosario Dawson. But we're really excited as well about the Cigarette Surfboard. This is a super cool film project. A whole bunch of people that have a real problem with the fact that a trillion, it's estimated, ciggy butts find their way into the ocean every single year. Ben Judkins talked to us about his film on the show. The Cigarette Surfboard is making its premiere across the world. That's the world premiere of the Cigarette Surfboard at Northwest Fest in our home city of Edmonton at the Metro Cinema at the Globe. It's a film you do not want to miss. It's really incredible, the advocacy effort underway on this project. And of course, I'm a big Jack Johnson fan, so I love to see him participating in the film. It is pro surfer after pro surfer after pro surfer, and a powerful story too. That's the Cigarette Surfboard, just one of the 20-ish documentaries screening at Northwest Fest. Make sure you check them out online and go support those films in theater. You can check it all at northwestfest.ca. And if you don't yet have a plan for Mother's Day, we know that you're getting right now down to crunch time. Friesen Brothers has you covered with their Mother's Day charcuterie box. You can check out more at cateringbyfriesen.com. That's where you can build your custom charcuterie box for Mom. What a great way to celebrate her. Let her know how much you appreciate everything she does. You're going to get Alberta meat. You're going to get Alberta cheese. And of course, all the accoutrement for just $90. You can pick it up at your local Friesen Brothers, 17 of them across the province. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. As much as we hate to just talk casually about it, we know that soon wildfire season will be upon us. I mean, dozens of wildfires have been burning through the winter underground, but it's one of those sort of out of sight, out of mind type things, right? It's not until the smoke is filling the air. Kids' soccer games and music festivals are canceled or at least compromised because the air quality is about as bad as it gets. Trina Moyles spent a good part of her career up in those watchtowers. She was on lookout. She's an expert on wildfire, on spotting them and on putting them out. She's also a journalist and an author. And she joins us to give us the unvarnished truth about how we got to where we're at right now and what we need to do to make it better.
Well, I grew up in the Peace River country. My dad was a biologist, so he was often flying over these fire towers. At the time, there was 127 in the province when I started. Now there's only 100, but so I kind of grew up with the knowledge that this job still existed. Like, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that there's still humans out there in the forest and the mountains, you know, scouting for smoke. Lookouts are the first line of detection in terms of wildfire smoke in Alberta. So it's a pretty neat job, and I felt really privileged to be able to do it for 7 years amongst some really incredible people who are sort of called back to the profession year after year. And yeah, no, it's really an incredible position.
Yeah, I would imagine, and we're going to talk a lot about the science of wildfires. Your piece in Alberta Views is amazing. I want to recommend everybody check it out, and obviously check out your book as well. But just on a personal side, the way my brain works, I'm curious to know it's a job that would come with a lot of isolation. You'd spend a lot of time in your own thoughts. You'd spend a lot of time processing what you're seeing and experiencing. How did your perspective on conservation evolve or change or grow through those 7 years that you were up on that lookout tower?
Yeah, it's really a unique vantage point into Alberta's forests. And so, I mean, you're witnessing not only, you know, like the climate or the environment season to season, or, you know, the intensity, or sometimes, you know, sometimes there were really rainy, there you go. And sometimes there were really rainy fire seasons as well, where nothing happened. So it was pretty incredible to have those experiences year to year. And then you also, you know, sort of gain insight into industry and the way that the forests are managed. You know, like you would see like logging operations, or, you know, the impact of oil and gas in the forest as well. You fly into your tower typically in, I mean, right now, a lot of the lookouts are getting ready to head out because it has been such a drought year and such a low snowpack over the winter. And so a lot of the towers are gearing up to open, I think in the next couple of weeks here. So you know, you would fly in a helicopter, there you go. And yeah, you really gain sort of a bird's eye view of the forest, and you get to see what a lot of Albertans would never get to see. So it was.
Sorry, Trina, your connection froze just for a quick second there. We heard you say you get to see things that most people wouldn't get to see. Your 2019 fire season, you had something really interesting happen, and I would imagine a bit of a heart-stopping scenario in 2019 when you found yourself, was it in your tower or in your established location, kind of sandwiched between two big fires? Johnny, looks like our connection may have frozen. Hey? Let me know. Trina, can you hear me?
Yeah, I've got you now. Sorry
okay,
about that.
Yeah, no worries. I was asking about 2019. You find yourself sandwiched between two pretty huge towers. Your heart in your throat, I imagine. Can you take us back to that? People will recognize the names of those fires.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2019, I was sandwiched between the Chuckegg Creek fire, which was threatening communities, including High Level and the communities around High Level. And then to my southwest was the Battle River fire, which was threatening the community of
Oh, dang it. Oh, dang it. We're talking to Trina Moyles, author and journalist, about her new piece in Alberta Views magazine in particular, Alberta is Burning. What are we going to do about it? This, Johnny, is a real reality check, and I kind of get the feeling. I mean, you kind of get, you feel your heart in your throat a little bit when you're talking about this. Trina, looks like we've got you back. We're just going to keep working on this, and as the universe gives us good internet signal, we'll figure it out. The podcast listeners will never know what's happening here. They're not going to have any idea. So that Chuckegg Creek fire is threatening high level, you were telling us.
Yeah, and it actually in late May it took a I mean, what a lot of wildfire scientists are seeing is that there's much more fire activity at night than previously, and so one evening that fire took, I believe it was a 30-kilometer run overnight, which really shocked a lot of wildfire managers and wildfire scientists. And sadly, it destroyed 19 structures in the Métis community of Paddle Prairie. And then the following day, I was actually evacuated from my fire tower, not from the risk of fire itself, but from the risk of really heavy smoke. And of course, that's something I think a lot of Albertans and people right across the continent are feeling as a result of the intensifying wildfire crisis is the reality of now we have to live with smoke through our summers.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I don't know why this stuck with me, but I remember seeing a news report out of Boston, Massachusetts, and they were talking about the air quality in Boston and how the biggest contributing factor to that was the wildfires in northern BC and northern Alberta, and that was just last summer. It feels like, I mean, this is now everybody's problem. Not to say that that's the only productive way to look at it, but this is something we cannot and should not ignore. I don't think it's a mistake that the team at Alberta Views gets you to write this piece for this issue, for the April issue, for the spring issue. The timing of this obviously makes sense from their editorial perspective. Everybody seems to be implying that this wildfire season is going to be a really bad one, and I guess it kind of sucks to acknowledge that they'll probably say the same thing the next year and the next year and the next year. Can you talk to us about why that is, why we are where we're at right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors to consider. I spoke with Dr. Mike Flanagan, who has 40 years of experience under his belt and is probably one of the leading voices on the wildfire situation right now. And I mean, he was really point blank about it. He was like, there's a lot of bit players. We can look at forestry management. We can look at a legacy of suppression in our forests. So, post World War II, the Alberta Forestry division really took this, you see a fire, you hit it hard, you put it out immediately. But fire is a natural part of the boreal ecology. One wildfire scientist told me, fire in the boreals is as natural as rain in the Amazon forest. We need fire to regenerate our forests. After nearly a century of putting fires out, we are left with, really old, dry forests. Climate change is real. We're seeing, look over the winter, we had in Alberta record-breaking temperatures, low snowpack. I've been seeing pictures of my former hometown, Peace River, incredibly dry in the hills, for the last couple of months. So, folks weren't able to get out cross-country skiing this winter. These are the kinds of indicators that we're experiencing, climate change, the effects of climate change. And so Mike Flanagan said, batten down the hatches. It's only going to get worse from here. And we should expect the worst so we can be ready because, here we see, image of the Chuckegg Creek fire when that blew up in 2019. The thing is it's a lot of folks within Alberta Wildfire were really frustrated last spring when the wildfires broke out because there's been, steady cuts to the agency over, probably the last 8 years, and from different governments, right?
I'm so glad you said this, Trina. I want to jump in for a second because I've heard this, conservatives, we got supporters of both parties and people that don't care about either party that listen to and watch this show. And I've had many conservatives say to me, Rachel Notley gets off the hook. People try to get Rachel Notley off the hook on this, but the NDP didn't support wildfire fighting efforts like they should have. And then the sort of the lefties, the centrists look at the conservatives and say, well, they're cutting it and they're slashing it and they're not doing what they need to do. And it seems like, to make a blanket statement, nobody believes that any government has really taken this as seriously as they need to. What's your assessment on the outside of politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty frustrating when you do work within the agency because, Mike Flanagan said it, we can't do more with less. And if the agency has been steadily cut away, over the years, like it's actually really putting communities at risk. And that's how we felt going into the 2023 season. I was not actually staffing one of the towers at that point, but I'd worked the 2022 season, and people don't realize at the end of that season in the fall, like the fire seasons are starting earlier, they're going later. And we were seeing the type of fire activity that was concerning. And yet, seasonal staff were being, let go. And this is because of political cuts. This is not necessarily because of the agency. I give full credit to people within the agency and the boots on the ground. Alberta Wildfire is an amazing system. And, when you're a part of it, you really get how all of these moving pieces are coming together to protect communities. It's truly impressive. And it's probably one of the best wildfire responses in the world. And I fully believe that. But it's the politics. It is the politics and the policies and, these cutbacks that have really, it has really made it so challenging for people at the district level to be able to do what they do because they're so short-staffed and people are getting seriously burnt out.
You're referencing Dr. Mike Flanagan. I just want to let people know if they want to hear like a 40-minute conversation with him. We talked to him on May 8th of last year. So Trina, this is like as Alberta was burning. The episode is titled Fighting Fires, Literal and Political. That's our May 8th episode. We'll link to it in our show notes. You can't help but feel anxiety around this. And that's not necessarily, I don't think, the purpose of this conversation, nor your Alberta Views feature, nor any of your other writing. But following that 2023 wildfire season, by the way, do you like or dislike calling it wildfire season? I got an interesting email last year where it really stuck with me. Somebody wrote into the show and said, you're normalizing it by calling it wildfire season. Like we talk about hockey season or golf season, barbecue season. They said, we got to stop normalizing this. How do you feel about calling it wildfire season?
Well, I mean, for people who work within the industry, we call it fire season. And it's actually kind of like, to me, it's like a beloved phrase because,
okay,
the way the agency is so effective is that seasonal staff who are on the front lines are attracted back to these positions year after year. And that expertise is critical. And that's another big issue I think that Alberta is facing right now is retention. So, I mean, but it's like, it's for folks who are in it, like it's more than a job. It is a lifestyle. It is a community. It is a family. Like people come back to these jobs, year after year, and they love it. And very passionate, intelligent, experienced people on the line. And so I think for me, the expression fire season is actually very beloved. I mean, but the reality I think with climate change now we're looking at is like, does fire season ever stop? Like, I mean, look at this winter with like an above average number of fires burning below the ground. And I mean, this is what we call holdover fires. And they're actually quite normal. It's normal to have when you have a huge mega fire, it's normal for that fire to continue to burn over the winter. It burns deep in the peat and organic layers. But this year we did see, an above average, I think it was almost like 10 times the normal the amount that people or that the province would normally get for these fires. So yeah, the fire season it's only continuing to get longer and longer. I mean, this year I think the province stepped in and said that they were announcing it was starting like mid-February. So
Jeez.
That's like a few weeks earlier. And I do want to acknowledge too that I was chatting with a couple of my former colleagues, and like their seasons are starting earlier this year, and that's a result of the devastating season we saw last year. But I also want to point out there was a lot of political pressure on the government last year. What surprised me as a journalist was just hearing or seeing the number of municipalities and counties that were speaking out about the lack of preparedness going into the 2023 season, or even in January, I believe, like the Alberta Chief Association of Fire, they released a letter like pressuring the government to say like, what are you doing differently with your staff this year? Like, we want to know what your plan is. And to me, that's very interesting to see and hear from the rural municipalities kind of speaking out and saying like, we need to address the fact that the province wasn't ready last year, even though they say that they were.
For those that are watching this on YouTube, Johnny's showing some footage shot by an independent journalist by the name of Kyle Brittain, who we talked to on May 24th of 2023. If you want to go back in our archives and check that out, the title of that episode, Why Alberta Wildfires Are So Bad in 2023. And a shout out, by the way, to our Patreon supporters, our Real Talk patrons who helped us support Kyle and his work. How about this for a comment? If you're just tuning in right now, we're talking to Trina Moyles, a journalist, a former wildfire wildfire tower lookout resident. I think I just botched your job title there, by the way, Trina. but Alberta rancher in our live chat, check this out, says we never had to worry much other than spring. When it came to fires, we now have to worry year round. So much so, Alberta rancher says we bought our own fire truck to protect our ranch. We were left with no choice. Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like we saw that last summer too. Like a lot of, individuals and like homeowners, landowners were like feeling like they needed to, set their own protection measures in place. And I mean, and I think we all do have a role to play. I mean, even if you look at like Mike Flanagan was pointing out, like there are things the government could do, like one of them is having a mandatory fire smarting around your home. So that means like cleaning up the debris, the small stuff that fires like grab onto and it increases wildfire spread. So the state of California has a mandatory fire smarting around their homes of 1.5 meters around the home, a buffer. And this kind of stuff can actually prevent fires from moving from property to property. So everybody does have a role to play in this. So I'm not surprised to hear of that landowner, having, feeling like they needed to take measures into their own hands to be ready.
I hosted for several years the Alberta Emergency Management Association. They had this like annual conference in Edmonton, and it would be like 500, mayors, reeves, councillors, fire chiefs, you name it, in a room. It was incredible to them talk about fire smarting communities. They talked about steps that communities like Jasper have taken in some of the cutting and the cleaning that they've done. But what really stuck with me was, those like cedar trees, the ones I'm talking about, they're like pillars, kind of the tall cedars. And they showed a video of cedar trees right under like people nice and close to people's houses, right? And right under the soffits, basically, like right up against the eaves troughs, basically. And they showed some footage. I think it was the Slave Lake fire, if I remember correctly, but they showed these cedar trees catch. And anybody that's seen the PSAs from the fire departments and seen like a Christmas tree go up, know how quickly that goes. And it was just like a flamethrower. It was like a high-powered candlestick just underneath the roof of the house, just and it just caught the shingles and the whole house was going in and every time now. There's one house in our neighborhood, I honestly want to ring their doorbell. Like, honestly, I want to intervene because they've got those cedars right up against the house. That's not the thing that the average person thinks about when they're landscaping or when they're working, because you never think it's going to happen to you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a good point. Like, the reality is we do need to see the landscape through this lens of fire. We need to think about, and like, what's your evacuation plan if a fire is threatening your community? That's another point that Dr. Mike Flanagan said. Like, every community should have a wildfire response plan in place. How do you get people out of that community if need be? Where do they go? What are people's plans? I mean, these are the things that individuals and then also communities, and then of course the government should be thinking about to be ready.
I've been lucky enough to speak with somebody that you did as well. As a matter of fact, you lead off your Alberta Views piece with her, Amy Cardinal Christensen, and Sharon in our live chat, a proud Métis. Sharon wonders, she asked me how many Indigenous folks were in that room with you at the Alberta Emergency Management Conference. I mean, actually, to Sharon's point, there were representatives from First Nations communities, but we're probably not talking about that reality geographically and otherwise in the context of wildfires, in the context of fire management, in the context of environmental stewardship. Can you take us into your conversation with Amy and what you learned from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I have so much respect for Amy's work. She's really such a force in Canada. And, according to Amy and her colleagues' research, 42% of the evacuation events across the country are First Nations communities. So, First Nations need to be, in a sense, leading these conversations on how wildfires are impacting communities and what we can do differently. And I think what a lot of folks don't realize is that when these fires threaten First Nations communities, it's not just structures that are at risk. It is traditional hunting grounds. It is, a lot of these communities are still very much reliant on, traditional hunting for subsistence. The Dene community of Châté in northern Alberta was evacuated 3 times last summer, 3 times. And in September, when, a lot of the media was had sort of lost interest in wildfire at that point, we actually saw one of our most historic, events on September 23rd, the Bassett Fire, which had ignited in June and was threatening the communities of Château around High Level there. And that fire took a 700,000 hectare run in one day. Like that's crazy, and that really shocked scientists like Dr. Mike Flanagan. And if Dr. Mike Flanagan is shocked, then we should all be a little bit worried. And that fire actually cut off the power supply to the community of Château. So a lot of people, lost all the food that they had sort of food reserves in their freezers. So, I mean, they're huge issues concerning wildfires in First Nations communities. And Dr. Amy Cardinal Christensen said, she'd really like to see a fire guardian program put into place. And that would mean funding, 12 months of the year, not just during the fire season, but 12 months of the year for First Nations to sort of be taking leadership in their communities in terms of decision making, in terms of fire mitigation around their communities, what happens during evacuations, these kinds of things. So, I mean, because First Nations are so disproportionately affected by wildfire, they should absolutely be, leading conversations on what we can do differently.
MA says we're busy fire smarting at our farm right now, she says, putting sprinkler systems on the roof of our house. Says we have plans for firefighting equipment in our yard. MA says, I don't live in a forest, but grass fires are a reality. We kind of let I don't know why we do this. We look at, I remember reading somewhere that, in our hometown right now of Edmonton, that the Edmonton River Valley is 22 times the size of Central Park. For some reason, I think we feel, or some of us have led ourselves to believe that like wildfire is not an issue in the urban centers, which is absolutely not true. Grass fires are a huge deal. You talk to any member of any fire department in any municipality in Western Canada, and they'll tell you that some of their new funding is going to these wildland firefighting units, these special trucks. We don't really think about the big cities, do we? But there's no reason why. I guess residents of Fort McMurray are going to be going hello, but it's something that I guess kind of maybe some of us think, well, this is happening in the boreal forest, and fire's always been part of the cycle, and fire's healthy, and we kind of, I guess, unless it lands in our own backyard, don't sound the alarm, so to speak, when it comes to our personal or political priorities. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. I mean, I think for someone who grew up in northern Alberta, I think that's very accurate. I mean, and it's not just for wildfire, it's a lot of things happening on the landscape. I think when you live in an urban center, especially where like political resources are concentrated, sort of out of sight, out of mind of what's happening elsewhere, right? I mean, growing up in the north, like our communities have been dealing with wildfire for very many years, and sometimes lacking, the support and the resources required to manage those fires. I mean, there's a great book called The Chinchaga Firestorm, and it's focused on the largest wildfire in Alberta's history, which happened in 1950. And, there were community members of the Métis community of Keg River that were literally out on horseback trying to put out this massive fire because, folks in Edmonton hadn't sent the adequate resources to help them manage the fire. So that's a really interesting book by Cordy Timstra out of the University of Alberta, the Chinchaga Firestorm. So yeah, I think that's a very accurate statement, and maybe this will put a little bit more political pressure on governments to be able to, we do need, Alberta Wildfire, needs more funding, needs more support to be able to do what they do, especially if, these wildfires are increasing in size, increasing in intensity, and, fire behavior that fire managers haven't seen before and is going to require additional resources. And they really need boots on the ground. That's a huge issue right now, is retaining firefighters, experienced firefighters, because yes, they're hiring an additional 100 firefighters this year, but those people don't yet have experience on the fire line, and that's really needed. You need leaders out there who are experienced working with wildfires and can respond to the intensifying behavior that we're seeing.
It's impossible. One of the more memorable moments of my career as a video journalist, as a videographer, was getting up in the chopper with Sustainable Resource Development and shooting visuals above a raging wildfire, and to try to, we always try to talk to people. I know, folks like you with experience can talk about hectares and things like that, but most people want to understand it in like how many football fields it is or what have you. But to see it from the air, it takes your breath away. In a sort of a power of nature way, but also just it's a little bit terrifying, to be honest. And then under escort, obviously, to be able to go down on the ground and head in there and watch these firefighters work. I don't know if I can imagine a more physically demanding job. Like it's absolutely wild what they're doing in there. And you know all this already, but I'll say to people, my experience, there's both an eerie silence and there's also this popping and this cracking, like trees literally almost exploding, right? As they're so hot, and there's people in there, humans with like saws and shovels, and sure, there's the water bombers and the choppers, and I want to talk to you about the human toll in just a second. But to try to have people understand the work that these firefighters are doing and the danger that comes with it is almost impossible to articulate.
Yeah, it's really demanding, grueling work. And, I think it's one of those professions that we can romanticize, but in reality, it's like, you're digging lines. You're working a chainsaw for 12 hours a day. Like they're working really long. When these fires blow up, they're working really long shifts. And it's really demanding. And there's also like very little research that's been done on, the sort of the impacts of smoke and the harsh working conditions on worker safety and well-being. There was a study done that's looking at higher levels of cancer amongst wildland firefighters. They're really an underrepresented demographic of worker, in my opinion. And last year, there were 8 wildfire personnel that were lost in action and in between BC and Alberta, which was really devastating for our communities. And yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a lot more attention on wildland firefighter personnel, and not just the frontline workers, but also the managers as well. In 2021, 57 management positions were cut in Alberta. That means fewer people at the decision-making level of managing these huge wildfires. The number of incident command teams was cut from 4 to 2. The incident command teams are the ones that go into communities when these huge fires are threatening them, to be able to make decisions, to manage crews, manage resources. And so last year you had managers who were working 6 to 7 deployments throughout the summer. That's totally exhausting. And is really having a negative impact on people's mental health and well-being.
What would just so we can understand as civilians, what would one deployment look like on average?
I believe that because I was in my fire tower, I was not actually ever on one of these deployments, I should say that. But I believe that they are usually around 2 weeks to sometimes 3 weeks.
Okay.
And you wake up and you go. I mean, you're sleeping in tents out or trailers out in camps. You're out in the bush, so the living conditions are a bit tough. And then you wake up in the morning and you're on that fire. They're working crazy long hours. And doing everything they can to prevent the wildfires from threatening human values on the landscape. So I mean it's really difficult work, and I mean it's high pressure work. They're making they have limited resources that they're working with, and they have to make high level decisions, and that's those are not easy positions to be in. I'll say that.
Johnny, can you imagine fighting wildfires all day, hiking with a chainsaw, parched, sweating, hot, hurting, and then you come back and sleep in a tent, and then you wake up the next morning, crush a couple granola bars, and you're back at it?
No, I can't imagine. I have a lot of respect for wildfire fighters and all the ones that come in, because we're underfunded and we need to bring people in from Mexico and elsewhere. These are tireless workers, and a lot of respect to them.
Wild. Cherie is in our chat. We're talking to Trina Moyles. If you're just joining us, Cherie says, I'm very anxious up here in Peace River. There's been very little snow this winter. We have air purifiers all over the house. Cherie says it's going to be a nasty smoke season. Our hospital is laying out evacuation plans already. I guess on one hand, it's good to hear that the hospitals are planning for that. On the other hand, it sucks that they have to, right, Trina?
Yeah, exactly. It is. But I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction for preparedness. So I think, although this is they're hard conversations to have, and no one wants to think of these worst case scenarios, it's the right thing to do. I mean, we need to be prepared, and that, again, that comes down to households, and it comes down to municipalities and then the provincial government as well.
So there are people talking about the this Repel Attack program being cut in 2019. Obviously, you've laid out for us by the numbers some of the positions that have either been eliminated or not been filled, or some of the budget cuts that are happening here, which I understand that there's polls across the budget. I understand that everybody has compelling arguments for why they need what they need out of Alberta's $50-ish billion budget, but this one just seems hard to justify. You spoke to the mayor of was it High Prairie, Mayor McAteer?
High Level,
pardon me. And they have an interesting friendship agreement with a neighboring Indigenous community. I won't say they're taking matters into their own hands, but they're doing what they can to protect their community. Can you tell us about that and maybe give us a sense of it, whether that's unique or maybe it could be a precedent?
I think it's very unique. I was really impressed to chat with Mayor McAteer, and she was saying that over the last number of years, they've been recognizing that the community of High Level is sort of it's a regional center for the neighboring communities. And so if there are these, evacuation events, like I said, the community of Chate was evacuated 3 times last year, and they went, the first place they go is High Level. So it is a hub for communities that are being evacuated in the northwestern corner of the province. And so they've been advocating, working with the Deneta First Nation to be able to fund a regional center, a specialized wildfire evacuation center. That's a place where people can come, they can stay, they can access resources. There's food, there's, maybe even like education for their children, because some of these communities are out of their homes, for weeks on end. And so, in previous evacuation years, like when they were threatened by the Chuckegg fire, like sometimes they're sending community members all the way down to Edmonton, and that's if you're from a very northern remote community, especially First Nations communities, there are a lot of cultural barriers in being sent down to an urban center. It makes sense to keep people closer to home. And so, yeah, their community is trying to rally the funds for this center to exist, which I think is really an amazing precedent, and maybe could be replicated elsewhere in the province as well, to try and keep people evacuations are going to happen, we know this, so let's try and keep people a little bit closer to home versus sending them to Edmonton or to Calgary. So
I'd be curious for your take on this, and I'll recognize that you were on Wildfire Tower lookout and not an arson investigator, but I do think you obviously have an informed opinion. I spoke with Alberta's premier last June in this studio, and she made a comment on the show that made national news. And she basically, well, let me just read the headline, put out in a story by Colette Derwartz of the Canadian Press, former colleague of mine at the Calgary Herald. Alberta Premier downplays link between wildfires and climate change, commits to arson investigations. People, loyal listeners of this program will remember Danielle Smith basically said to me, we don't know about the cause of a lot of these fires, and we're looking into allegations of arson and this, that, and the other. Now, there have been, over the course of the last number of years, charges laid, arson charges laid as relating to many wildfires. But something about what Danielle Smith said on Real Talk really, I'm not using the word disparagingly, but it really triggered a lot of people. It pissed a lot of people off. What's your assessment based on your lived experience as a professional? How much of this was arson, do you think? How much is lightning? How much is ATVs? How much of it is cigarette butts? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it differs season to season. Arson can happen. To me, last year, what we saw coming from politicians, these are political distractions, in my opinion, and they actually hurt us all. And I say that not being, in support of either political party, but I mean, they're distractions. Like, our wildfire scientists with, decades of experience are telling us that we're seeing, increasingly dry, hot conditions that are, starting fires and then also, contributing to their spread. And so it's usually around, I believe in Alberta, I'm not sure of the statistics exactly from last year, but it's I believe lightning caused fires around 40% of the fires in Alberta. And sometimes the lightning fires are actually the ones that have will burn over a larger area. And that's because they're happening in the northern typically in the northern part of our province where the boreal forest is situated. So that's actually quite normal for these large lightning fires to take off. I mean, to be exhibiting the kind of fire behavior that we're seeing from them, that is not normal. That is something new. That is definitely being aggravated by climate change. So I think the whole arson thing last year was a distraction from what has been happening, not just last season, but, over the last like 20, 30 years, what they've been seeing, these intensifying conditions and behaviors in wildfires. So, but I do want to say too, Mike Flanagan was talking about mandatory forest closures. No one in Alberta is going to like that. That's a very unpopular thing.
That's my next question.
We do know that most of our worst wildfires tend to start in this window of time, what we're in right now, and happened much earlier in Alberta this year when the snow melts and the forest has yet to green up, so leaf out. And this is a really critical period of time where these fires can ignite. They can start from an ATV, they can start from a cigarette butt, they can start from a downed power line. The wind blows a power line down and then the line ignites a wildfire. So these are really critical times. Forest closures are exactly like they sound, limiting human activity in the bush. And no one likes that. But also, no one likes living with smoke and no one likes being evacuated from their communities. So these are the kinds of tough questions that we're going to have to be asking ourselves in future years.
Yeah, I mean, I want to wrap with that. I mean, you kind of just answered the question, but I was just going to ask you about people's personal sacrifice. Let's call it what it is. Like for some, I can think of, we have this group, the Outdoorsman Social Club, shout out to them. And every summer we try to get out for, between 70 and 100K and get our fishing lines in the water. And we go where there's no cell phone reception. And it's just this wonderful time to recharge. However, obviously wildfires have factored into those in recent years, including fire bans. And, it kind of sucks to hike all day and not have a fire at night, but it's also a small price to pay for, not starting a forest fire. But there are a number of different applications, or a number of different implications, I should say, that this could have on people, whether that's limiting access to the backcountry, whether it's limiting camping access, fire bans, or otherwise. How much should people, do you think, with intuitive and science-informed policy, let's keep our fingers crossed for that, how much should the individual be prepared to sacrifice, a word that politicians won't use, to ensure that we can all do our part? How much of it is up to us?
I mean, I think it's when we look at the stats of how many human-caused fires occur year to year. There you go. Okay, 61.9% from 2023 were caused by people. I think to me, it's a no-brainer. Do you care about your home? Do you care about your community? Do you care about your farmers? We do have to take these things into consideration when we recreate on the landscape. How are we coupable? Are we responsible for some of these wildfires? And it turns out we are. So, to me, it's like with what we're seeing in terms of communities being threatened and literally burnt over, like communities in northern Alberta last year, East Prairie, which is a Métis community around High Prairie, I believe lost 40 structures. Fox Creek was a community that lost around 80 structures. Like the risk is really real. And, there have been other seasons where communities in southern Alberta are also threatened or there's structural loss. So we all have a role to play. And I think that is being informed by what, Alberta Wildfire is telling us in terms of limiting human behavior in the forests. Do we care about our communities? Do we care about the places we recreate in too? I think that's another thing to point out is that, last year, 2.2 million hectares of forest. Like if that kind of scale of loss occurred every year, we would have no forests left, or we would have no places to recreate. So if we care about our landscape and our communities, then we do need to adhere to some of the bans and limitations on human behavior in the bush that, the government puts into place.
You said 2.2 million hectares burned?
I believe that's the number.
Okay. So like 2.5 football fields in 1 hectare. Okay. So you're talking like 6 million football fields. I promise to never do math live in a show, but approximately that's about 6 million football fields for people that need a perspective check. That's unbelievable. Before we cut you off, or thank you for your time. Let me be more positive. Amazing to have you on the show, Trina. Your expertise is so appreciated. I want to shout this out to Ken as well, because Ken does make a good point. I'm not an expert, but it strikes me as a pretty good point. And he says the ignition point whether that could be an ATV or a cigarette butt or a lightning strike or whatever, the ignition point is not the same as the reason for the scale of the fire. That's another point to make, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And if I said that before and it made it seem like I believe that it's no. They're two separate things for sure.
But I just think that Ken makes a really good point, which is like if climate change and other contributing factors, but the lion's share of the conversation, I think here, when you talk to the experts, not just you, but all the conversations that we've had, that people are talking about climate change. And so whether the fire starts, whether it's arson or a cigarette butt or an ATV or whatever, the fact that the forests are so primed to explode is a relevant factor and a bigger piece of that conversation. If someone can simply say, there was an arsonist at large and we caught the arsonist, so everybody can relax, that's not the reality.
Yeah, the reality is fires are going to start in a number of different ways, whether that's natural or human caused. And then, as you said, too, the conditions that we're seeing in our forest right now and the pressure of climate change will contribute to the spread.
Our thanks to Trina Moyles for that fantastic interview. And of course, we'll get her back on the show when her new book's out about human and bear interactions. Obviously has a good command of what she's talking about. If you wanted to revisit that episode with her or share it with friends, you can find it on April 3rd of 2024 in our archives. Coming up in just a minute, our focus on World Water Day. If you think about it, we don't talk about water nearly enough. Is that the safest statement I've ever made on this show? I think so. But first, I want to remind you that this episode and this whole thing happens with the support of our amazing partners like our friends at California Closets, who have custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. All you gotta do is ask. It's a free consultation with their design professionals when you visit californiaclosets.ca. You tell them what you're looking to do. Talk to them about the part of your home that you're really focusing on, whether it's a custom closet, it could be an entertainment center, maybe it's your garage that you're looking to transform. They're experts, the designers paint a picture for you, working within your budget. And then, given the green light, their installers go to work. We've worked with them. Our family has. We have seen the return on that investment. We absolutely love the work that they did almost a decade ago for us, and it still holds up. Pure quality, custom design that fits our space and budget. They'll do the same for you when you get that conversation started at californiaclosets.ca. You know, it feels appropriate on this Planet Protectors episode of the Best of Real Talk to remind you about the work that Kubi Renewable Energy is doing. They're Western Canada's busiest solar installer, and in a world where the need for sustainable solutions has never been so evident, never been so critical, solar energy is emerging as a beacon of hope. The sun, that boundless resource that graces us with its presence every day, holds the key to a cleaner, greener future for generations to come. Kubi Energy, right now, available for that free quote if you're looking to install solar into your home, your business, your farm, your cottage. And they're also hiring. If you're an electrician, if you're an office manager, if you're an expert in sales, make sure you check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca. You know, another big part of protecting the planet is addressing emissions. And that's what Pathways Alliance is all about. This is the 6 biggest players in Alberta's oil sands working with provincial and federal governments to build a carbon capture and storage network. The design to reduce emissions, to protect existing jobs, and to create new job opportunities. The global energy demand is changing. The world is looking for responsibly produced energy, and Alberta can provide that. You can learn more details by checking out pathwaysalliance.ca. And all that talk about wildfire, we'd be remiss if we didn't remind you about our partners at Complete Care Restoration. This is a team that's been around for more than a quarter century, restoring property and rebuilding peace of mind. Professional property restoration services based out of Edmonton, but they travel. As a matter of fact, right now as we speak, they have certified technicians and construction professionals that are working to rebuild communities impacted by the 2023 wildfires. and they're ready to go in 2024 as well. It could be floods, it could be a sewer backup, it could be the discovery of asbestos or black mold. Don't take that into your own hands. With disaster strikes, make sure you think of complete care restoration. Back on March 21st, we committed an episode of Real Talk to observing World Water Day. We spent so much time talking about news and politics, and maybe not enough time talking about what we eat, what we breathe, what we drink. And if you think about it, there's nothing more important on planet Earth than water. I know that you're going to enjoy this highlight from Dr. Scott Ketchison, from Dr. Mark Summers, and from Andre Asselin.
As a hydrologist, I probably think more about water than many folks. But I mean, thinking about World Water Day, I can't help but start at sort of the global scale. And we know that, there are huge water issues globally, and certainly they're similar in ways, but different, I suppose, to those that we're facing here in Alberta. But, globally, we see sort of climate change, and water is at the center of that piece, with more extreme weather being driven by differences in the water cycle. And, those climate extremes like floods and droughts are sort of focused around water. Of course, globally, water scarcity is another issue, both with access to clean water, but also for agricultural and food development. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I start. But then obviously I can't help but think about the current state of water in Alberta here, where obviously much of the province and most of the country, for that matter, is in some level of abnormally dry conditions up to sort of extreme drought.
Water is everywhere. It's unbelievable. It affects every aspect of our lives. Water is needed for our energy industry. Water is needed for our agriculture industry. Water is everywhere. So water affects food security. It affects energy security. My career has largely been either directly or indirectly in the field of climate change. And while I can say that not everything climate is water and not everything water is climate, the two of those are highly interrelated. And if you look at the province of Alberta, I'm going to hone in on the province of Alberta, the greatest climate impacts will be felt in water, in terms of where we get water, in terms of when we get water, and in terms of how much water we get. And frankly, we're going to see more extremities in all three of those things. And so if we zoom in one layer deeper, yeah, we're all in this together. I agree. We talked about it affects everyone across the province, but in reality, it affects part of the province more than other parts of the province. And so we have this interesting manifestation of the 80-20 rule in Alberta, where about 80% of the population lives in southern Alberta, where we get about 20% of the water. And so it's going to be felt a little more there. And then if you zoom in even one layer deeper, there are really three main rivers in particular: the Red Deer River, the Old Man River, the Bow River, that service a tremendous amount of industrial operations and service significant agricultural operations through irrigation and others, and well north of 1 million people, not hundreds of thousands of people, but on the order of millions of people. That's where the impacts are going to get felt most acutely.
You can compete against resources and land and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, water is critical to everyone. And so that's something that I think we should be able to focus on and bring attention to. So it's good to have a day where we all sort of focus on these things. And just building on the drinking water aspect of it, the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 6 is focused on providing clean drinking water to everyone. So that's something that the globe has agreed to try and pursue. And so there's a lot of good work going on in that direction, and it applies both in some of the less developed nations across the world that need more help, and right here at home. So it affects absolutely every aspect of our industry, our sectors, our humanity, our aquatic ecosystems, our land ecosystems as well, our industry. It touches on everything we do. And so I appreciate the opportunity to sit here with these fine gentlemen. And I'm going to get a quote in. I can't remember who said it, but it builds on something that Mark said. And it was that water is the teeth with which climate change will bite.
We hope that this best of episode of Real Talk, The Planet Protectors, has inspired you, has provided some insight into what's being done right now to address our plastic problem, wildfires, and the strain on our water systems. What now? Take action. Talk to your friends. Send us a note to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Let us know how this episode resonated with you. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast. You can find all the information on our website, ryanjesperson.com. Thanks for being a part of this best of edition of Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.